Welcome to the 11th session of our study on the book of Genesis. In this session, we're going to read chapters 31 through 34. Jacob, Rachel, and Leah leave Laban's household and go back to the home of Isaac. Jacob wrestles with God and prepares to meet Esau. Shechem wants to take Jacob's daughter, Dinah, as his wife. But we begin with a prayer. O God, our Father, open our eyes and enlighten our minds as we study your word. So grant that our minds may know your truth and our hearts may feel your love, and then confirm and strengthen our wills that we may go out to live what we have learned through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So it's been 20 years since Jacob left home, and he has this extreme dread of a reunion with his brother Esau. He had cheated Esau out of his firstborn blessing, and Esau threatened to kill him before he left home. In Mesopotamia, he has plenty enough to fear from his father-in-law Laban, who claims Jacob has cheated him as well. Between a rock and a hard place, Jacob's first act after setting out for home is an encounter with messengers of God. From this point onward, everything is a matter of two camps, or two levels, the divine and the human. This is the key to understanding the meeting between Jacob and Esau. Jacob will have to deal with God before he can resolve his problem with Esau, but he has to deal with Laban before he can face God. So we begin with chapter 31, and I'll read verse 1 through 3. And he heard the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob has taken everything of our fathers, and from what belonged to our father he has made all this wealth. And Jacob saw Laban's face, and look, he was not disposed toward him as in the time past. And the Lord said to Jacob, Return to the land of your fathers and to your birthplace, and I will be with you. So the first we heard of Laban's sons was at the end of the last chapter, where we read Laban had culled all the brindled and speckled and spotted goats and dark-colored sheep and given them to his sons to watch a 3 days journey from where Jacob was watching the rest of Laban's sheep. We don't know any of the sons' names or where they have been the past 15 or 20 years or anything else about them. They're here to dramatize the atmosphere of suspicion and jealousy in Laban's household. They just pop up with this claim that Jacob has taken everything from their father. So Jacob sees the hostility in Laban's face, and the Lord encourages him to leave town at his earliest convenience. We go on with verse 4 through 12. And Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah out to the field to his flocks, and he said to them, I see your father's face, that it is not disposed toward me as in times past. But the God of my father has been with me, and you know that with all my strength I have served your father. But your father has tricked me and has switched my wages 10 times over, yet God has not let him do me harm. If thus he said, the spotted ones will be your wages, all the flocks bore spotted ones. And if he said, the brindled ones will be your wages, all the flocks bore brindled ones. And God has reclaimed your father's livestock and given it to me. And so at the time when the flocks were in heat, I raised my eyes and saw in a dream, and look, the rams mounting the flocks were brindled, spotted, and speckled. And God's messenger said to me in the dream, Jacob. And I said, Here I am. And he said, Raise your eyes, pray, and see. All the rams mounting the flocks are spotted, brindled, and speckled. For I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. So Jacob calls Leah and Rachel out to the field so he can talk to them in private. Here Jacob describes a dream sequence which explains how so many of the goats are speckled and spotted and the sheep are dark. There's no mention of Jacob using striped rods in the water troughs at this point. Dream sequences generally appear in the Elohist or the E narratives, and the Lord talks directly to Jacob in the Yahwehist stories or the J stories. Our redactor editor has apparently mixed and matched the stories at the end of chapter 30 and the beginning of 31 to allow Jacob to explain to his wives that God has orchestrated all of this and that God continues to be with him. There's an urgency here that they must take flight, and that he certainly doesn't want to muddy the waters by talking about some strategy involving peeled rods in water troughs. So we go on with verse 13 through 18. I am the God who appeared to you at Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made me a vow. Now rise, leave this land, and return to the land of your birthplace. And Rachel and Leah answered, and they said to him, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's house? Why, we have been counted by him as strangers, for he has sold us, and he has wholly consumed our money. For whatever wealth God has reclaimed from our fathers is ours and our children's. And so whatever God has said to you, do. And Jacob rose and bore off his children and his wives on the camels. And he drove all his livestock and all his substance that he had acquired, his property and livestock that he had acquired in Paddan Aram, to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. So Laban's normally a large part of the bride price would go to the bride. Jacob has worked for Laban for 20 years, so there should be a substantial wages owed to Jacob that would be considered bride price. These women have seen none of it. They considered themselves to have been sold for profit by their father, as though they were not his own flesh and blood. So they are all in for Jacob getting whatever he can and leaving. We go 19 through 24. And Laban had gone to shear his flocks, and Rachel stole the household gods that were her father's. And Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean in not telling him he was fleeing. And he fled, and he and all that was his. And he rose and he crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the high country of Gilead. And it was told to Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled. And he took his kinsmen with him and pursued him a 7 days' journey and overtook him in the high country of Gilead. And God came to Laban the Aramean in a night dream and said to him, watch yourself, lest you speak to Jacob either good or evil. So Laban's flocks were 3 days away from Jacob's. So if Laban had gone to shear his herds, he would have been gone for a while. So it took him 3 days before he heard anything about this. We're told that Rachel stole the household gods, which would have been small figurines that represent the God that protected the family. Laban's family seemed to believe in the God of Abraham, kind of, but they were not monotheists. They had their other gods as well. The gods that Rachel took are called teraphim, icons which may relate to ancestor worship. Other than these household gods, Jacob is taking what is rightfully his. He has good reason to believe that Laban would renege on their agreement, so he is getting out while the getting is good. We notice here that Laban's pursuit uses the same language as Pharaoh's pursuit of Moses in Exodus. In 22 through 25 here, it says, and it was told to Laban that Jacob had fled, and he took, and he pursued, and he overtook. In Exodus 14, 5 through 9, we have the same language, and it was told to the king of Egypt that the people had fled, and he took, and he pursued, and he overtook. Identical language. There's a link in here, which we see all through here. Jacob has gotten as far as Gilead, which is still east of the Jordan River, but not far east. At the end of this passage we just read, God comes to warn Laban in a dream, lest you speak good or evil. Basically, this just means lest you speak anything at all. Best you just keep your mouth shut. We go on with 25 through 35. And Laban caught up with Jacob, and Jacob had pitched his tent on the height, and Laban had pitched his with his kinsmen in the high country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, what have you done, deceiving me and driving my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee in stealth and deceive me and not tell me? I would have sent you off with festive songs and timbrel and lyre. And you did not let me kiss my sons and my daughters. Oh, you have played the fool. My hand has the might to do you harm. But the God of your father said to me last night, watch yourself, lest you speak to Jacob either good or evil. And so you had to go because you longed so much for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? And Jacob answered and said to Laban, for I was afraid, for I thought you would rob me of your daughters. But whomever you find your gods, that person shall not live. Before our kinsmen make recognition of what is yours, with me and take it." But Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. And Laban came into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and to the tent of the two slave girls, and he found nothing. And he came out of Leah's tent and went to Rachel's tent. And Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel cushion and sat on them. And Laban rummaged through the whole tent and found nothing. And she said to her father, "Let not my lord be incensed that I am unable to rise before you, for the way of the woman is upon me." And he searched, and he did not find the household gods. So, for a minute here, we're going to talk about what Robert Alter calls the tendency to mitigate in modern English translations. We've talked about Alter's discussion of translation before, but we've got a specific example we want to look at here. In Genesis 31:26, Laban says, "What have you done, deceiving me and driving my daughters like captives of the sword?" The operative word here is nahag, which means driving. Nahag is the term for driving animals. In verse 18 of this same chapter, nahag is used, and he drove all his livestock. Alter says that too often it is translated as carrying away in this situation. The New Revised Standard Version says, "Laban said to Jacob, 'What have you done? You have deceived me and carried away my daughters like captives of the sword.'" The NIV, "What have you done? You've deceived me and you've carried off my daughters like captives in war." The Common English Bible, "What have you done? You've deceived me and taken off with my daughters as if they were prisoners of war." Translating it as carried away or taken off with loses the edge of brutal exaggeration in Laban's angry words. Laban is angry. "You have driven my daughters like captives of the sword," not "you have taken off with my daughters." Feel the difference? At the end of this section, we have Rachel hiding the gods that Jacob obviously doesn't know about. He would certainly not have made the death promise if he thought anyone in his household was guilty of the theft. At the very end, maybe there's a little bit of satire here with Rachel sitting on the gods. We go on with 36 through 40. And Jacob was incensed and voiced his grievance to Laban. And Jacob spoke out and said to Laban, "What is my crime? What is my guilt that you should race after me? Though you rummage through all my things, what have you found of all your household things? Set it here before my kin and yours, and they shall determine between us two. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your she-goats did not lose their young. The rams of your flock I have not eaten. What was torn up by beasts I brought not to you. I bore the loss from my hand. You could seek it. What was stolen by day and stolen by night. Often by day the parching heat ate me up, and the frost in the night, and the sleep was a stranger to my eyes." Here is Jacob's formal plea of defense against false accusations. He had gone above and beyond in caring for Laban's sheep and insuring him against any loss. We go on with 41 through 44. "These 20 years in your household I have served you, 14 years for your two daughters and 6 years for your flocks. And you switched my wages 10 times over. Were it not that the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the terror of Isaac was with me, you would have sent me off empty-handed. My suffering and the toil of my hands God has seen, and last night he determined in my favor." And Laban answered to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters, and the sons are my sons, and the flocks are my flocks. And all that you see is mine. Yet for my daughters, what can I do now? Or for their sons, whom they bore? And so come, let us make a pact, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." Laban refuses to give an inch. The daughters are his daughters, the grandsons are his sons, but they're obviously attached to Jacob, and there's not much he can do about it. And he has also had this warning from God. So he's willing to cut a deal here. 45 through 54. And Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, Gather stones. And they fetched stones and made a mound. And there they ate on the mound. And Laban called it Yegar Sa-Yudah-Dutha. But Jacob called it Galeed. And Laban said, The mound is witness between you and me this day. Therefore its name was called Galeed and Mizpah. For he said, May the Lord look out between you and me when we are out of each other's sight. Should you abuse my daughters, and should you take wives besides my daughters, though no one else is present? See, God is witness between you and me. And Laban said to Jacob, Look, this mound, and look, this pillar that I cast up between you and me. Witness be the mound, and witness the pillar, that I will not cross over to you past this mound, and you will not cross over to me past this mound, and past this pillar for harm. May the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the gods of their fathers, judge between us. And Jacob swore by the terror of his father Isaac. And Jacob offered sacrifice on the height, and he called to his kinsmen to eat bread. And they ate bread and passed the night on the height. So notice we have another Jacob stone story here. Jacob set up a stone as a pillar, and then they made a mound of stones next to that. Both names, Yegar Sa-Hadutha in Aramaic and Gal-Ed, which is Hebrew, mean the mound of witness. Mizpah means lookout point. Laban is designating an international border here. Neither one of them are allowed to pass it to do harm to the other. Laban refers to the God of Nahor and the God of Abraham. Jacob goes back only to the God of Isaac. So we go on to chapter 32. Now this is going to be confusing because the Hebrew Bible has only 54 verses in chapter 31 and 33 verses in 32. The last verse in chapter 31, verse 55 in the King James Version or the NRSV, or many other common modern English translations, is the first verse in chapter 32 in the Masoretic text or the Hebrew Bible. So if you're trying to follow me, you're probably going to be one verse off all through the next chapter, assuming you've got one of the normal modern translations. So I'm going to read verses 1 through 6, which may be verse 55 of chapter 31 through verse 5 of chapter 32 in your Bible. Just hang in there. We will be back together in chapter 33. So verse 1 through 6. And Laban rose early in the morning and kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them. And Laban went off and returned to his place. And Jacob had gone on his way, and the messengers of God accosted him. And Jacob said when he saw them, This is God's camp. And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the steppe of Edom. And he charged them, saying, Thus shall you say to my lord Esau, Thus says your servant Jacob, With Laban I have sojourned, and I tarried till now, and I have gotten oxen and donkeys and sheep and male and female slaves, and I send ahead to tell my lord to find favor in your eyes. So there's some symmetry here. Jacob saw messengers or angels in Bethel on his way to Mesopotamia. He sees them again on the way back. God's camp he called Mahanaim, meaning God's camp, I guess. The messengers Jacob sends ahead to Esau are human messengers, but there's still a linkage between these two sets of messengers, the divine messengers and the human messengers. Of course, we know that Jacob is overlord to his brother, but Jacob repeatedly refers to himself as your servant, while he calls Esau my lord. He's being very deferential at this point. We go on with 7 through 13. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to your brother, to Esau, and he is actually coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. And Jacob was greatly afraid, and he was distressed, and he divided the people that were with him, and the sheep and the cattle and the camels into 2 camps. And he thought, should Esau come to the one camp and strike it, the remaining camp will escape. And Jacob said, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, The Lord who has said to me, return to your land and to your birthplace, and I will deal well with you. I am unworthy of all the kindness that you have steadfastly done for your servant. For with my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. O save me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and strike me, mother and sons. Jacob has two camps, one on each side of the Jordan River. Edom is generally considered to be south of the Dead Sea. The Jordan flows into the Dead Sea from the north, but there is no outlet on the south. So we have to assume that Esau is coming from the south, and Jacob is along the Jordan, still north of the Dead Sea. There are a lot of twos in this story. Of course, Jacob and Esau are twins. Jacob has two wives, flocks divided into two parts. Now we have two camps. Jacob is clearly afraid when he hears Esau is coming with 400 men. But he also, as we'll see, has faith in the God who has made promises to him. So we go on with 14 through 22. And you yourself said, I will surely deal well with you, and I will set your seed like the sand of the sea, multitudinous beyond all count. And he passed that same night there, and he took from what he had in hand a tribute to Esau his brother, 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milch camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses and 10 he-asses. And he put them in the hands of his servants, each herd by itself. And he said to his servants, pass on before me, and put distance between one herd and the next. And he charged the first one, saying, when Esau my brother meets you and asks you, saying, whose man are you, and where are you going, and whose are these herds before you? You shall say, they are your servant Jacob's, a tribute sent to my lord Esau. And look, he is actually behind us. And he charged the second one as well, and also the third indeed, all those who went after the herds, saying, in this fashion you shall speak to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, look, your servant Jacob is actually behind us. For he thought, let me placate him with the tribute that goes before me. And after I shall look on his face, perhaps he will show me a kindly face. And the tribute passed on before him, and he spent that night in the camp. So we end this section with the after I shall look on his face, and perhaps he will show me a kindly face. Jacob is hopeful. The Hebrew word used over and over in this section, and actually beginning with chapter 31, right at the very first verse, is the word panim, which means face. Fox translates this same section, verse 20 through 22, with an emphasis on the terms using panim as a base. For he said to himself, I will wipe the anger from his face with the gift that goes ahead of my face. Afterward, when I see his face, perhaps he will lift up my face. The gift crossed over ahead of his face. It is clear that the text is signaling something significant here by using the word for face over and over again. What is it? We'll face it shortly. We go on with 23 through 29. And he rose on that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 slave girls and 11 boys and crossed over the Jabbok ford. And he took them and brought them across the stream. And he brought across all that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. And he saw that he had not won out against him. And he touched his hip pocket. And Jacob's hip socket was wrenched, and he wrestled with him, and he said, let me go, for dawn is breaking. And he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, not Jacob shall your name hence be said, but Israel, for you have striven with God and men and won out. Initially, all Jacob knows is that it is a man he is wrestling with. This is the culmination of Jacob's life story, and he is not heel grabbing or stealing a birthright or blessing or rolling away a stone or contending with Laban. He is wrestling. His adversary maims Jacob with a magic touch to his hip socket. We don't know exactly how that works. But daylight is approaching, and apparently it's an issue because we have the images here of some type of night spirit or folklore that loses its power or is not allowed to be seen in the daylight. But he resists identification. On the eve of Jacob's reunion with Esau, this stranger is perhaps an embodiment of portentous antagonism in Jacob's dark night of the soul. Jacob is permanently maimed, made crooked in order to be made straight before his reunion with Esau. The stranger has to ask Jacob his name, but no, now his name is Israel, for you have striven with God and man and won. The text says that Jacob has won out. He really seems to have fought to a tie. The stranger has been able to hurt Jacob, but cannot break loose of Jacob's grip. There is little character development in Abraham, Noah, Eve, Adam, Isaac, or Rebekah, all of whom remain basically constant figures through the stories about them. But Jacob changes, and the matter of deception is intimately related to that development. As Esau points out, Jacob's very name connotes deception, to catch. And Jacob starts out as a manipulator, but Jacob is changed after his experiences in Mesopotamia. He has been the deceiver and the deceived. He has hurt and been hurt. He is now a husband and a father, a man who has struggled and prospered. For the rest of the story, he is no longer pictured as a man of action, but more often as a relatively passive man, like his father Isaac, seeking to appease his brother, avoiding strife and risk. And precisely at the juncture that marks this change in Jacob's character, he has his encounter with God at Penuel. God blesses him. Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, because you've struggled with God and with people and were able. Is this divine encounter the signpost of the change in Jacob's character or the cause? Either way, as his character changes and he ceases to be the deceiver, just then he sheds the name Jacob, the one who catches, and becomes Israel, the one who struggles with God. We go on with verse 30 through 33. And Jacob asked and said, Tell me your name, pray. And he said, Why should you ask my name? And there he blessed him. And Jacob called out the name of the place, Peniel, meaning I have seen God face to face, and I came out alive. And the sun rose upon him, and he passed Peniel, and he was limping on his hip. Therefore the children of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh, which is by the hip socket to this day, for he had touched Jacob's hip socket at the sinew of the thigh. So I've seen God face to face, and I've come out alive. And we also hear the sun rose. Jacob left his homeland at the sun set, and he returns as the sun arises. In this last verse, the Hebrews are referred to for the first time as the children of Israel. Notice also that it says to this day in that last verse. The original audience of this narrative is tied to and can identify with this ancestor who wrestled through the night with the man who was no man. We move on to chapter 33, and we'll start with verse 1 through 3. And Jacob raised his eyes and saw, and look, Esau was coming, and with him were 400 men. And he divided the children between Leah and Rachel, and between the two slave girls. And he placed the slave girls and their children first, and Leah and her children after them, and Rachel and Joseph last. And he passed before them and bowed to the ground 7 times until he drew near his brother. So we have this binary split again, 2 wives on one side, 2 concubines on the other. Then he puts the concubines and their children up front with Rachel and Joseph in the back. Bowing 7 times as a monarch approaches was a common court ritual, and that's what Jacob is doing here. He's bowing 7 times as Esau approaches. Verse 4 through 8. And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell upon his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And he raised his eyes and saw the women and the children, and he said, "Who are these with you?" And he said, "The children with whom God has favored your servant." And the slave girls drew near, they and their children, and they bowed down, and Leah too, and her children drew near, and they bowed down. And then Joseph and Rachel drew near and bowed down. And he said, "What do you mean by all this camp I have met?" And he said, "To find favor in the eyes of my Lord." So this is the big surprise in the story of the twins. Jacob was prepared for a battle to the death, but instead Esau embraces him. Joseph introduces the children, but lets Esau just assume that the women were his wives. What do you mean by all this camp I met? The question here that Esau asks means something like, who is this procession of people I met, including all the servants who brought him sheep and goats, etc. And Jacob replies, "To find favor in your eyes, my Lord." We move on with 9 through 12. And Esau said, "I have much, my brother. Keep what you have." And Jacob said, "Oh no, pray, I have found favor in your eyes. Take this tribute from my hand. For I have not seen your face as one might see God's face, and you receive me in kindness. Pray take my blessing that has been brought you, for God has favored me, and I have everything." And he pressed him, and he took it. And he said, "Let us journey onward and go, and let me go alongside you." Esau has apparently done very well himself financially. He appears to be somewhat of a prince. He refers to Jacob as my brother, while Jacob continues to call him my Lord. Again, there is this theme using the word face. Once the protagonist has met, fought with, and defeated the divine being, he is assured of success upon his meeting with his human brother. The meeting with the divine and the human adversaries can be considered a unity, one human process in two narrative episodes. The unity here is accomplished by repeating the use of the word panem, or face, in the text. Everett Fox suggests that the sound, reading aloud, enhances the ability of the reader or listener to make this connection, face and face. By offering these gifts, Jacob is offering restitution for stealing Esau's blessing many, many years ago, although he can't say that out loud. We go on with 13 through 17. And he said, "My Lord knows that the children are tender, and the nursing sheep, and my cattle are my burden. And if they are whipped onward toward a single day, all the flocks will die. Pray let my Lord pass on before his servant, and let me drive along at my own easy pace, at the heels of the livestock before me, and at the heels of the children, till I come to my Lord in Seir." And Esau said, "Pray let me set aside for you some of the people who are with me." And he said, "Why should I find such favor in the eyes of my Lord?" And Esau returned that day on his way to Seir, while Jacob journeyed to Succoth. And he built himself a house, and for his cattle he made sheds. Therefore is the name of the place called Succoth. So when Jacob says, "Until I come to my Lord in Seir," he's making a diplomatic offer. He actually doesn't plan to go to Seir, but he's going to head back up north again. Succoth is north. We go on with 18 through 20, through the end of this chapter. And Jacob came in peace to the town of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Paddan Aram, and he camped before the town, and he bought the parcel of land where he had pitched his tent from the sons of Hamor, father of Shechem, for 100 kiestas. And he set up an altar there, and he called it El Eloah Israel. Just as Abraham had purchased a field and a cave for a gravesite, Jacob is purchasing a piece of land which he can use to take up a permanent residence in Canaan. So he now owns some actual land in Canaan. We go on with the next chapter, chapter 34, and the first 4 verses. And Dinah, Leah's daughter, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to go seen among the daughters of the land. And Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the land, saw her, and he took her, and he lay with her, and he abused her. And his very self clung to Dinah, daughter of Jacob, and he loved the young woman, and he spoke to the young woman's heart. And Shechem said to Hamor his father, saying, Take me this girl as wife. Verse 1 says, Dinah went out to go seen among the daughters of the land. This means something like to make the acquaintance of or to travel around among. This does not mean to visit. The language uses 2 terms that are important here, to see and daughter. They are important because we'll see these terms again, which helps link events together, kind of in the way the word face was used in the past few chapters, to tying different episodes together. Dinah goes out among the daughters of the land, an identity of terms that might suggest symmetry or a likeness. However, she is an immigrant's daughter, not the daughter of the land, which, if we remember Sodom, makes her a candidate for rape. Dinah is a daughter of Jacob. Shechem is a son of Hamor. There will also be sons of Jacob in this episode. Shechem, scene of Dinah in verse 2, is superimposed on Dinah's scene among the daughters of the land. Shechem not only saw her, he took her, he lay with her, and he abused her. He raped her, and then he seemed to have fallen in love with her. Again, in verse 4, we see the verb take, as in take her for a wife, not take as in rape this time. We go on with 5 through 12. And Jacob had heard that he had defiled Dinah his daughter, and his sons were with his livestock in the field, and Jacob held his peace till they came. And Hamor, Shechem's father, came out to Jacob to speak with him. And Jacob's sons came in from the field when they heard, and the men were pained, and they were very incensed, for he had done a scurrilous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, such as ought not be done. And Hamor spoke with them, saying, Shechem, my son, his very self longs for your daughter. Pray give her to him as wife, and ally with us by marriage. Your daughters you will give to us, and our daughters take for yourselves. And among us you will settle, and the land is before you. Settle and go about it, and take holdings in it. And Shechem said to her father and to her brothers, Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me I will give. Name me, however, much bride price and clan gift. I will give what you say to me, and give me the young woman as wife. So the sons say this is a scurrilous thing in Israel. At that point, Israel is another name for Jacob, not a place, as it will be at the time the story is first read aloud from a scroll. This really means a scurrilous thing against Israel. The narrator does not say that Jacob's sons said this. It implies that they thought it. It's a technical means of imprinting the rage of Jacob's sons in the presence of Jacob, who so far has said absolutely nothing. We go on with 13 through 18. And the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father deceitfully, and they spoke as they did because he had defiled Dinah their sister. And they said to them, We cannot do this thing to give our sister to a man who is a foreskin, as that is a disgrace for us. Only in this way may we agree to you, if you will be like us, every male to be circumcised. Then we can give our daughters to you, and your daughters we can take for ourselves, and we can settle among you and become one folk. But if you will not listen to us to be circumcised, we will take our daughter and go. And their words seemed good in the eyes of Hamor, and in the eyes of Shechem, son of Hamor. So the sons begin by refusing, saying they cannot do this thing. They ignore the offer of a generous payment, instead require circumcision, infliction of pain on what in this case is the offending organ. This is probably going a little farther than Hammer had in mind when he suggested they become allies. We go on with 19 through 24. And the lad lost no time in doing the thing, for he wanted Jacob's daughter, and he was most highly regarded of all his father's house. And Hamor with Shechem his son came to the gate of their town, and they spoke to their townsmen, saying, These men come in peace to us. Let them settle in the land and go about it, for the land, look, is ample before them. Their daughters we shall take us as wives, and our daughters we shall give to them. Only in this way will the men agree to us, to settle with us to be one folk. If every male of us be circumcised as they are circumcised, their possessions and livestock and all their cattle will they not be ours, if only we agree to them and they settle among us. And all who sallied forth from the gate of this town listened to Hamor and to Shechem his son, and every male was circumcised, all who were sallied forth from the gate of this town. So here we heard for the first time that the lad in verse 19 suggests that Shechem is also just an adolescent. We thought, well, Dinah was a little girl. Apparently Shechem's a little boy, teenager, I guess. We noticed that Hamor's speech added that the Hivites would become masters of the newcomers' livestock. He seems a bit greedy here. Jacob's sons didn't mention anything about sharing the livestock and cattle. They said we'll be allies. We go on with 25 through 31. And it happened on the third day, while they were hurting, that Jacob's two sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took each his sword and came upon the city unopposed, and they killed every male. And Hamor and Shechem his son they killed by the edge of the sword. And they took Dinah from the house of Shechem and went out. Jacob's sons came upon the slain and looted the town, for they had defiled their sister. Their sheep and their cattle and their donkeys, what was in the town and in the field they took, and all their wealth and all their young ones and their wives they took captive. And they looted everything in their houses. And Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, You have stirred up trouble for me, making me stink among the land's inhabitants, among the Canaanite and the Perizzite, when I am a handful of men. If they gather against me and strike me, I shall be destroyed, and I and my household. And they said, Like a whore should our sister be treated. The Hivites have rendered themselves temporarily helpless through mass circumcision, and Simeon and Levi just went in and massacred them and brought their sister out. Initially, we could have imagined that Shechem was bargaining in good faith for Dinah's hand. Now we find that he had been holding her captive in his house after he raped her. Simeon and Levi say they have defiled their sister. Well, in fact, it's only Shechem who is responsible. But they have massacred every male in town. Jacob is obviously concerned about potential problems with Canaanites and Perizzites who live in the area. But his sons ask, Like a whore should our sister be treated? Jacob doesn't respond. This chapter is another turning point for Jacob. In the next chapter, he returns to Bethel and reconfirms the covenant, but he begins to lose much of his paternal power. He will be increasingly at the mercy of his sons, more the master of self-dramatizing sorrow than of his own family. Next week, we read chapters 35 through 37. Jacob goes to Bethel and builds an altar. Rachel gives birth again to a second son, Benjamin. We find Reuben sleeping with Jacob's concubine. The death of Isaac, the lineage of Esau. We introduce Joseph and the coat of many colors. And we conclude the Jacob narratives and begin the Joseph narratives next week. Until then, be safe. Hope to see you Wednesday.